Hey guys, tonight we step through the massive oak doors of a medieval convent, where the scent of candle wax mingles with lavender and parchment. You probably won't survive this without a giggle. Nuns doing administrative paperwork by candlelight isn't exactly your average Netflix binge. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the chat, so I know who's cranking their fan at 2 a.m. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push past a marble trough where novices wash their hands, and immediately you notice the hum of industry spinning wheels, clicking quills, scratching Latin prayers, and voices chanting the divine office. It feels more like a corporate retreat than a life of isolation. As you stride along cloistered arcades, courtyard gardens bloom under your feet, their medicinal herbs already plucked for morning salves. Mainstream historians note that by the 13th century, many convents managed estates spanning dozens of villages, a fact that might shock you if you still picture nuns as silent veiled ghosts. Historians still argue whether these economic ventures were encouraged by bishops or driven by zealous abbesses. You duck into a cool scriptorium where a sister examines a vellum page under flickering lamplight. Here's your quirky tidbit rumor. Has it some nuns added secret doodles of rabbits hiding behind trees in margin illuminations, an early form of midrashic humor that only insiders would catch? Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about last week? Well, this is its manuscript equivalent, hidden sketches to lighten the long hours tucked between saintly images. Out in the sunlit courtyard, peasants deliver sheaves of wheat and jugs of fresh milk. You see a nun in a heavy wool wimple, negotiating grain prices with a local reeve, her voice measured but firm. Mainstream scholarship confirms that some abbesses wielded authority equal to lower-ranking clergy hearing disputes and setting rents and autonomy rarely granted to laity. Yet fringe scholars debate whether this power ever truly extended beyond convent walls. Historians still argue whether abbesses could levy legal fines independently. A soft breeze stirs the cloister, carrying birdsong and the distant clatter of weaving looms. You trail a ribbon of cloaked figures into the infirmary, where sisters in stained habits tend plague victims with herbal poultices and whispered prayers. You can almost taste the pungent thyme and rose hips they crushed into ointment sensory detail that grounds you firmly in the reality of medieval healthcare. Walking past the herb garden, you notice rows of sage and pennyroyal kept for digestive tonics. One sister hums an old hymn, her voice gentle as dusk settles across the chapel's pointed arches. You pause at a mosaic depicting Saint Scholastica, holding a chalice, a reminder that women's spiritual authority wasn't just symbolic. In fact, mainstream records show some nuns conferred blessings and absolutions in local communities rivaling parish priests. As Vespers bells begin to toll, you lean against a worn stone column, thinking about how this place feels like a university hospital and treasury rolled into one. This peek behind the veil reveals a medieval world where women in habits lived with more freedom than you might imagine, running businesses, leading troops of novices, and shaping culture with illuminated texts that survive to this day. But next time, we'll venture deeper from land negotiations to diplomatic missions that made convents pivotal players in European politics. You slip through the echoing refectory, where long oaken tables bear polished pewter plates and flagons of mead. You settle onto a carved bench opposite a trio of solemn sisters, their faces framed by crisp white wimples. Here you witness the paradox of cloistered life at dawn. These women vow perpetual enclosure, yet by midday they hold sway over the surrounding countryside. Mainstream historians note that by the late Middle Ages, nuns took solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But convent statutes often granted them individual ownership of dowries and the right to manage personal assets. Historians still argue whether these provisions emerged from ecclesiastical compassion or pragmatic fundraising needs. As you watch Sister Agnes rises to address the refectory, her voice is soft, but carries across the stone floor. She reminds novices to recite the vow formula precisely at matins and underscores the importance of their communal rule. Yet behind her serene tone lies tangible power. This very sister oversees a portfolio of tenant farms and mills that supply grain to nearby markets. You might picture these vows as shackles, but here they function like credentials, legitimizing nuns' authority in both sacred and secular spheres. Your nostrils flare at the scent of spiced barley porridge and honeyed almonds breakfast, fit for royalty, yet prepared by sisters bound by poverty vows. You catch a humorous flash. One nun tattles that another stashed almond crust in her sleeve for a secret snack, a tiny act of rebellious sweetness. This quirky tidbit suggests that convent life included its own food heists and clandestine indulgences, transforming vows of poverty into opportunities for covert snack diplomacy. Outside the refectory window, workmen unload barrels of cured fish and sacks of flax, reminders that convents were vital nodes in local economies. You join Sister Beatrice as she strolls through a brisk autumn morning, her heavy habit parting to reveal a leather satchel brimming with account books. She records each transaction in precise Latin, her quill dancing across parchment columns. Mainstream archival evidence confirms that many convents maintained double-entry ledgers centuries before most European merchant houses adopted the practice, a testament to nuns' financial acumen. Historians still argue whether convent bookkeeping influenced secular accounting methods. A sudden laugh ripples through the novices as Sister Cecilia produces a tiny wooden whistle shaped like a rabbit. She blows a single high-pitched note to summon the cellarers, an amusing relay system that once included whistles carved as mice hairs or even miniature dragons. You're struck by the blend of practicality and whimsy. A whistle's squeak echoing through cloisters could rally workers as effectively as any crack of the abbess's staff. In the chapter house, you observe the formal profession ceremony, where novices kneel before an abbess draped in a jeweled pectoral cross. Soft sunlight filters through stained glass, illuminating halos of violet and gold. The novices speak their vows aloud: poverty, chastity, obedience, each word binding them to the convent's rule. Yet after the ritual, they retire to private cells where they craft embroidery, copy legal charters, or care for orphaned children. Their cloister does not confine their influence, it amplifies it. You trail Sister Margaret into a vaulted chamber where villagers have queued for spiritual counsel. She dispenses absolution, offers prayers for harvests, and mediates minor disputes over boundary stones. Mainstream church records reveal that some nuns served as arbiters in land conflicts, issuing binding decrees that local lords grudgingly respected, an authority rarely afforded to laywomen. Historians still argue whether these decisions held weight beyond convent jurisdiction. As noon approaches, the abbey bell tolls 12 times and labor shifts to the infirmary. You pause at the threshold. Sisters clad in black habits tend to the sick, their hands steady as they administer doses of rosewater concoctions and honeyed compresses. Their medical duties stem from vows of charity, yet position them as indispensable healthcare providers in an era when physicians were scarce. Fringe accounts even suggest some sisters performed rudimentary surgeries, stitching wounds or extracting arrowheads with rudimentary tools, a practice long debated by scholars for its plausibility. Leaving the infirmary, you ascend a narrow spiral staircase into the library loft. Rows of chained manuscripts gleam in lamplight. Nuns consult them for morning readings, copying illuminated psalters and debating scriptural nuances. You catch a sibling's stifled giggle. Apparently one novice slipped a tiny sketch of a dancing goat into a devotional margin, a playful nod to carnival revelry. This margin doodle hints at the convent's role as a creative crucible, where spiritual reflection and artistic experimentation coexisted. You pause by a window overlooking terraced herb gardens, their neatly planted beds of lavender, sage and mint, arranged like a living mosaic. Novices learn pharmacology here, infusing oils for anointing and preparing poultices. Their vow of obedience commands them to follow medical recipes verbatim, yet improvisation often arises from necessity, like adding a pinch of crushed snails to soothe irritated skin. This curious remedy survives in scattered herbal manuscripts, fueling debates among medievalists about its efficacy. As Vespers approach, you retrace your steps to the cloister, the scent of incense and crushed basil guiding you toward the chapel. You notice how vows, ordinarily symbols of restriction, unlock nuns' paths to public service, intellectual inquiry, and economic stewardship. In this world, the act of renouncing worldly pursuits becomes a gateway to unprecedented freedom. You settle against a column gazing at the flickering altar candles. Outside, the convent's day continues. Women in habit, negotiating grain leases, nursing the wounded, tutoring the local gentry's children. You realize that vows did not confine these medieval nuns. They conferred upon them a mantle of legitimacy that empowered them far beyond the cloister walls. You step into the sun-drenched manor house that the convent acquired 2 generations ago, its mullioned windows casting patterned shadows over stacked hay bales. You probably think nuns were too busy chanting to talk shop, but here they're haggling like Wall Street traders with pitchforks. As you cross the threshold, the scent of fresh-cut straw and damp earth fills your nostrils, grounding you in the realities of agrarian enterprise. Mainstream scholars estimate that by the 14th century, many convents held up to 50 manors, each generating income from rents, tithes, and crop sales. Historians still argue whether these estates rivaled those of minor nobility in sheer profitability. You trail Sister Matilda down a low-ceilinged hall where rows of painted cupboards house leather-bound account rolls. Her wooden clogs click softly on flagstone, each step echoing with purpose. In her arms, she cradles a bundle of parchments tied with crimson ribbon leases due for renewal. Today, she must negotiate with a burly reeve who claims his tenants can't pay the full harvest tithe after a late frost. You can almost taste the bitter tang of frustration on his breath as he bickers in the courtyard, but Sister Matilda remains composed, as if reciting psalms in debate form. Off mic, you whisper, "Who knew covenant life included a clause on frost clauses?" Your joke reverberates against the stone. She greets the reeve with courteous firmness, her voice measured. "Brother Thomas, the convent's rule requires full harvest dues to sustain our infirmary and schools. Yet our statutes permit equitable relief in times of hardship." The reeve grunts, but you catch a flicker of respect in his eyes. Fringe accounts tell of one abbess who forgave an entire village's rent after an outbreak of hoof-and-mouth disease, an act that saved dozens of families, yet nearly bankrupted the convent treasury. Historians still argue whether that forgiving gesture was a spiritual mandate or savvy public relations. You linger by the granary's open doors, where golden wheat sheaves steam in the morning chill, and sacks of barley are piled like miniature pyramids. The scent of yeast and sweet grain conjures images of banquet halls, yet here it fuels charity kitchens that feed the poor. You poke at a stray stalk, its awns tickling your fingertips, and imagine the hands that harvested it under scorching sun. Sister Matilda corners you with a conspiratorial smile. "Care for a grain tasting?" Before you can protest, she hands you a pinch of raw barley, chewy, nutty, surprisingly sweet, like nature's version of granola gone wild. This quirky tidbit hints at the convent's experimentation with new crop strains recorded in margin notes of botanical tractates. Moving on, you enter the dovecote courtyard, where dozens of white doves coo and flutter above an ivy-clad tower. Here, the convent raises pigeons for meat manure and messenger service, an agricultural innovation seldom matched by local manors. The air thrums with wing beats and the earthy musk of cooing birds, a strangely soothing soundtrack to medieval logistics. You quip fancy pigeon post. These sisters had better delivery guarantees than your morning courier app. You laugh at your own joke, imagining a dove dropping a parcel with the speed of a Royal Express. Next, you join Sister Eleanor at an open-air market stall where farmers hawk flax wool and salted herring. She inspects bolts of linen with a practiced eye, tapping the fabric to test thread count. Her habit's wool folds around her like a humble suit of armor in trade negotiations. Mainstream economic analyses show that convent-controlled markets often standardized quality and prices, reducing fraud and boosting regional commerce. Yet some historians debate whether this intervention stifled local competition or provided much-needed stability. Historians still argue whether convent market regulation undercut rural merchants. You watch as she raises a bolt of deep blue dye made from woad, its rich hue a testament to advanced dyeing techniques, first taught by traveling artisans invited by the abbey. The smell is sharp, like crushed berries left to ferment. She negotiates a fair price, then turns to counsel a young weaver on balancing thread tension. You notice how her gentle guidance blends managerial savvy with maternal warmth, a reminder that economic power often came wrapped in subtle persuasion rather than blunt force. Nearby, a cluster of lay brothers unloads barrels of olive oil and amphorae of wine imported from the Mediterranean. Sister Matilda reviews shipping logs that record customs duties, transit times, and spoilage rates. You lean in to whisper, "Imagine tracking perishable cargo without spreadsheets or GPS." The Reeve reminds you, historians still argue whether convents maintained reliable long-distance trade networks or merely relied on local produce, and you tuck that debate into your mental ledger alongside the account rolls. As afternoon sunlight gilds the landscape, you wander into the abbess's private study, a vaulted chamber lined with maps of estates stretching beyond county borders. She stands before a large table strewn with quills and ink pots, plotting crop rotations that would maximize yield. A stray sprig of rosemary from the convent garden lies atop her notes, its aroma weaving into the dusty parchment scent. You sense the quiet intensity of a leader, balancing piety and pragmatism. Mainstream records indicate that some abbesses introduced three-field systems decades before local lords adopted them, enhancing soil fertility and boosting harvests. Yet scholars debate whether these practices originated within convents or were borrowed from secular innovators. Historians still argue whether convent agricultural reforms were truly groundbreaking. Your final stop is the threshing floor, where novices use flails to separate grain from chaff in a rhythm so hypnotic it feels like a chant. The sun's low angle catches motes of chaff drifting through the air, golden and ethereal, as if the harvest itself were blessing the convent. You join in lifting a sheaf to the sun, feeling its weight. This tactile moment connects you directly to the medieval economy's lifeblood. As dusk falls, you reflect on how these sisters wielded economic power, not through brute force, but through meticulous record-keeping, strategic innovation, and diplomatic negotiation. Their vows of poverty became tools of accountability. Their devotion funded schools, infirmaries, and artisans. In a world where women seldom held fiscal authority, these medieval nuns carved out realms of autonomy that still echo in today's non-profit and cooperative movements. You slip into the hushed sanctuary of the convent library, where shafts of afternoon light slant through slender lancet windows, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits in the golden glow. The air is thick with the mingled scents of parchment oak timbers and the tang of iron gall ink so potent that you can almost taste its acrid bite on your tongue. Here in this vaulted chamber, you're witness to a scholarly haven. Sisters in habits bent over lecterns, their quills scratching out passages of Aristotle in precise Carolingian minuscule. Mainstream scholarship confirms that by the 12th century, many convent libraries housed hundreds of volumes rivaling collegiate collections in size and scope. Historians still argue whether these nun-run scriptoria influenced the rise of medieval universities. You glide past rows of chained books, their covers embossed with simple crosses or fleur-de-lis motifs. Sister Juliana pauses beside a folio. She's copying a gospel illuminated with miniature scenes of Christ's Passion, and she invites you closer. You notice her careful brushstrokes in lapis lazuli and gold leaf, each stroke reflecting a devotion as intense as any prayer. This convent employed full-time illuminators and scribes, and mainstream records indicate that some manuscripts took months to complete, requiring steady hands and laser-like focus. Yet despite such pious labor, fringe chronicles hint at secret competitions among novices to produce the most elaborate marginalia, a playful twist on artistic devotion. Historians still argue whether these competitions were officially sanctioned or quietly tolerated. A sister glances over and whispers, "Mind the ink spill." You crouch to inspect a small blotch, an errant flourish of black that has fallen like a bird's footprint on blank vellum. Here's your quirky tidbit. Rumor holds that one particularly mischievous novice used ink-dipped quills to sketch tiny portraits of the abbess, surreptitiously peeking from behind a curtain, complete with exaggerated wimple wrinkles. These doodles were said to circulate like underground pamphlets, sparking laughter and low-voiced whispers during silent reading hours. You smirk, recalling the dancing goat margin from section 2. The convent's creative crucible truly had a sense of humor. As you wander deeper, a wooden globe dotted with hand-painted kingdoms catches your eye. Sister Maria is lecturing two novices on geography. This is Francia, here is Lombardy, and beyond these seas lies the Holy Land. Her voice is soft but authoritative, echoing against stone walls. Mainstream evidence shows that many nuns studied cosmography and rudimentary natural philosophy, copying treatises on the Ptolemaic system and translating Arabic texts on astronomy into Latin. This intellectual cross-pollination fueled debates over the shape of the earth and the nature of celestial spheres, debates that played out in convents long before they reached Parisian lecture halls. You slip onto a cushioned bench near a lectern piled high with manuscripts. Sister Agnes invites you to handle a codex bound in tooled leather, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. As your fingers trace the embossed vine patterns on the cover, you sense centuries of devotion and scholarly rigor. She explains how some convents kept meticulous catalogues, noting each book's scribe date of completion and provenance. This level of bibliographic care long predates similar cataloguing in secular libraries, a mainstream fact that underscores nuns' pivotal role in preserving classical knowledge. A sudden hush falls as Sister Beatrix and Sister Clementine enter, carrying a stack of commentaries on St. Jerome's letters. You overhear them discussing whether Jerome's asceticism provides a model for women's spiritual freedom or imposes undue self-denial. You lean in, catching the scholarly edge in their tones. Here is a living debate. Historians still argue whether Jerome's austere ideal liberated women spiritually or reinforced patriarchal strictures. The sisters' discourse flows seamlessly between Latin quotations, interpretive nuance and personal reflection, reminding you that intellectual life thrived within these walls. Your eyes drift to a small wooden desk glowing in an alcove of soft light. A single novice hunches over a vellum page, carefully erasing a miscopied word with a knife's edge. You hear the faint rasp of blade on parchment, a sound as intimate as a whispered confession. This quirk of manuscript culture reveals that errors weren't simply tolerated, but corrected with near-sacred precision. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some sisters kept scorecards of who made the fewest mistakes, turning proofreading into a silent contest of perfectionism. Historians still argue whether such contests ever overlapped with customary humility rituals. You rise and wander toward a tall shelf where bundles of sheepskin parchments await copying. A novice named Sister Cecilia hands you a quill trimmed from a goose's wing. It's lighter than you expect, tapering to a fine point. You run it through an inkwell and feel the slight drag as you drag letters across blank parchment. The sensation is grounding, almost meditative, reinforcing the convent library's dual nature as both workspace and sanctuary. You quip under your breath, "Bet this quill's sharper than my morning pen." Sister Cecilia laughs softly, her eyes crinkling behind her veil. Across the room, Sister Hildegard, no relation to the famous abbess, reads aloud from a newly acquired theological treatise. Her clear enunciation carries the text's nuanced arguments about free will and predestination to every corner of the chamber. Mainstream sources note that nuns were often well-versed in theology, sometimes more so than local parish clergy. Yet debates linger over whether their interpretations directly influenced broader church doctrine or remained confined to convent discourse. Historians still argue whether women's theological contributions were ever formally recognized by ecclesiastical authorities. You trail after Sister Hildegard to a low bookshelf where ancient medical texts rest beside psalters. She picks up a volume on herbal medicine, her finger tracing recipes for poultices made from comfrey and violet. The marginal notes her own annotations detail, experimental mixtures tried in the infirmary. You recall the crisp scent of pennyroyal from section 2 and feel that sensory connection deepen here. Scholarship and healing merge in inked wisdom. This intersection of science and faith highlights how convent libraries functioned as repositories, not just of scripture, but of practical knowledge. A breeze drifts in as you approach the south window, where a small, inconspicuous engraving shows a stylized fish, possibly an early watermark or mischievous emblem. A novice confesses it's her hallmark, a signature left on nearly every page she copied. This quirky practice allowed scribes to claim subtle authorship, a quiet assertion of identity in an anonymous culture. You compare it to the coded rabbit whistles of Section 2 and nod these convent women found creative outlets, even within strict enclosure. As late afternoon shadows lengthen, the librarian tolls a small brass bell time for compline. Sisters set aside their manuscripts, their quills resting like silenced oboes. You rise with them, feeling enriched by the intellectual tapestry you've witnessed. This library has proven itself more than a chamber of books. It's a vibrant hub of creativity, debate, and devotion. Every shelf, every folio, and every whispered historians still argue whether has affirmed that medieval nuns authored, preserved, and contested ideas that shaped Western thought. You step back into the cloister, the scent of ink lingering on your fingertips like a talisman. As bells chime evening prayers, you reflect on how this scholarly sanctuary offered women freedom to learn, teach, and innovate, an intellectual autonomy that still astonishes modern minds. You follow the faint clatter of wooden bowls and the herbal tang of dried marigold into the convent's infirmary, where sunlight filters through latticed windows onto a row of low benches. You might imagine medieval medicine as crude bloodletting and leeches, but here you find a surprising blend of science, spirituality, and practical compassion. Mainstream records show that by the late Middle Ages, many convent infirmaries treated hundreds of patients, yearly rivaling municipal hospitals in both scope and skill. Historians still argue whether convent medical practices directly influenced early university medical curricula. A nun, in a simple brown habit, moves with quiet confidence between beds strewn with straw pallets. You catch the aroma of crushed lavender and comfrey mixed into poultices for wounds and burns. Sister Juliana kneels beside a pale-faced peasant woman, her fingers deftly mixing a salve of honey-crushed violet petals and a dash of wormwood. The sweetness of honey masks the bitterness of the herbs, creating a balm both soothing and antiseptic, long before germ theory would explain why. This mainstream fact underscores nuns' empirical expertise. Their remedies often reduced infection rates far better than unregulated barber surgeons. Historians still argue whether convent healers kept systematic records or relied solely on oral tradition. You lean against a stone pillar, listening to the soft murmur of prayers and the distant hiss of boiling water in a copper cauldron. The clink of metal instruments, tweezers, scalpels, and probes echoes like a subdued orchestra. Sister Agnes lifts a small silver bowl containing a mixture of crushed mustard seed and vinegar. She explains, "This will draw out inflammation." You inhale its acrid scent, your eyes watering, and nearly sneeze before remembering to breathe through your mouth. Here's your quirky tidbit rumor. Whispers that some sisters used a tincture made from crushed nightshade berries to treat insomnia, a risky concoction whose dosage required near-sacred precision. Novices reportedly practiced measuring minute pinches of the powder into vials, an exercise that doubled as early pharmacology training. You can't help but picture a lineup of novices with tiny spoons testing their dexterity under candlelight as the abbess looks on approvingly. Historians still argue whether such experiments were officially sanctioned or kept secret within the convent. Across the infirmary, a novice named Sister Beatrice gently checks a child's feverish brow, blotting sweat with a cool linen cloth scented with rosewater. The humid, sweet fragrance mingles with the sharp tang of vinegar, creating a sensory tapestry that feels both antiseptic and comforting. You imagine the child's relief as the cloth soothes burning skin, a simple act of tenderness that speaks louder than any sermon. Nearby, a wooden rack holds glass bottles of tinctures, labeled in neat Latin script, Tinctura Valerianae, Elixir Rosarum, and Aqua Distillata. Sister Beatrice offers you a sip of distilled rosewater, its floral sweetness lingering on your tongue. She smiles and confides that sisters sometimes use the same rosewater as a refreshing face spray during long copying sessions in the scriptorium, an elegant crossover between medicinal and cosmetic uses. You're drawn to a curtained-off alcove where Sister Margaret tends a man with a festering leg wound. The air here is earthy and pungent like upturned soil. She applies a poultice of comfrey root honey and crushed snail shells a remedy prized for promoting tissue regrowth. The crunch of snail shells under her thumb adds a strange rhythmic texture to the hush of prayers. Mainstream medical treatises of the era mention the use of snail-based compresses, noting improved healing in damaged flesh, a testament to nuns' willingness to blend observation and tradition. Historians still argue whether convent-based surgical practices extended to more invasive procedures. A sudden cough interrupts the calm, and you turn to see a sister wearing a crude mask stuffed with aromatic herbs, an early form of miasma protection during plague outbreaks. The mask's scent of rosemary, thyme, and juniper cuts through the musty air like a sharp exhale. This fringe practice highlights nuns' innovative responses to epidemics. Some convent chronicles claim these herbal masks reduced mortality among caregivers, though skepticism persists. Historians still argue whether herbal miasma masks truly combated contagion or simply boosted morale. You step toward a wooden basin where Sister Cecilia washes a patient's head, her hands gentle as swirling water and soap lather. The rich, fatty foam clings to hair like whipped cream, each bubble reflecting the infirmary's soft light. This everyday scene belies the convent's broader commitment to hygiene, an emphasis on cleanliness that mainstream church councils sometimes decried as vanity. Yet nuns saw cleanliness as a form of piety, scrubbing floors, linens, and patients' bodies with equal dedication. As you move to leave the infirmary, you pause before a small shelf of bound volumes, herbal manuals, anatomical diagrams, and case notes. Sister Juliana flips through a page, detailing symptoms of consumption, annotating each entry in the margins with patient outcomes and recommended treatments. The meticulous notes read like proto-clinical studies, demonstrating a scholarly approach to medicine rarely acknowledged in secular chronicles. Mainstream researchers credit some convents with creating the earliest known medical casebooks, though debate lingers over how widely these volumes circulated beyond convent walls. Historians still argue whether such casebooks influenced early modern medical practice. You step back into the cloister, your cloak carrying the faint scent of lavender and comfrey. The world beyond these walls feels harsher windswept roads and cold stone hospitals, where barkeeps and barbers performed surgery without formal training. Here, sisters combined prayer and practice, blending compassion with skill to care for body and soul. You realize that medical mysteries solved within these convent walls didn't just heal wounds. They challenged assumptions about women's roles in science and medicine. A dove coos overhead as you reach the herb garden, its wings carrying a whisper of renewal. You brush your fingertips across a row of mint leaves, their cool freshness grounding you. In this sanctuary of healing, vows of charity became catalysts for medical innovation, granting nuns a freedom to explore, experiment, and save lives. It's a freedom you might not enjoy yet. Here it blossoms in every poultice stirred and every prayer whispered over the sick. As the sun dips toward the horizon, you carry the infirmary's lessons with you, that faith and science need not conflict, that compassion can be practiced with scalpel and stem alike, and that these medieval nuns wielded their freedom as effectively in healing as in prayer. You slip into the dimly lit chapel, where incense coils upward in slow spirals, and the glow of oil lamps bathes carved wood and painted saints in amber light. You probably won't survive another quiet space without humming a hymn, this one's dedicated to Saint Scholastica's legendary spiritual power. As you settle onto a cushioned pew, the scent of frankincense mingles with beeswax, and the soft patter of rain against stained glass creates an intimate lullaby. Mainstream records confirm that by the 13th century, some abbacies held the authority to grant absolution and penance powers, ordinarily reserved for ordained priests. Historians still argue whether such concessions were widespread or limited to elite imperial convents. Ahead of you, Sister Beatrice rises to deliver a short homily on humility. Her voice is gentle, yet resonant, filling vaulted arches with soothing cadence. You notice how she places her hands palm up, as if beckoning the heavens. It's a theatrical flourish that would impress any stage actor. Fringe whispers suggest that certain convents held clandestine services for local women, barred from parish churches, private masses, where nuns served as de facto priests, administering communion from makeshift chalices of silver and wood. Historians still argue whether these shadow liturgies ever violated canon law or existed purely in oral legend. A single candle flickers near the altar as Sister Beatrice shares a quirky tidbit. She claims that one particularly zealous abbess once used a carved ivory crozier topped with a tiny bell, ringing it to call penitents to private confession in the cloister's moonlit corridors. Imagine stumbling from your cell at midnight, only to find a cloak-shrouded figure offering absolution under a full moon, a spiritual drive-through of medieval mysticism. This playful legend reminds you that convent life blended solemn duty with moments of unexpected drama. You lean forward, tracing the outline of a painted angel on the pulpit's ornate frontispiece. The angel's halo glints in lamplight, its wings spread as if mid-flight. Sister Beatrice's homily weaves scripture with practical counsel. When you feel the weight of guilt, remember that divine mercy is as boundless as our convent's gardens. Her words wrap around you like a warm cloak, softening the edges of your modern anxieties. This sensory immersion underscores how spiritual authority functioned as emotional care in an age of constant peril. After the blessing, you join the long line of local villagers, filing into a curtained confessional booth, carved from polished oak. Inside, a sister's calm whisper greets you. She invites you to confess a minor transgression. You admit you once pocketed an extra almond at breakfast. She chuckles softly, then prescribes a penance recite 2 psalms and donate a handful of barley to the convent's granary. The bartered act feels personal, almost like a favor trading system. Mainstream accounts note that nuns often impose charity-based penances, acts of service or almsgiving, rather than corporal punishment, reflecting a pastoral approach distinct from parish clergy. Historians still argue whether such penances fostered genuine repentance or simply augmented convent resources. Emerging from the booth, you brush past carved reliefs depicting Mary Magdalene's tears, their stone petals catching lamplight. You sense the quiet power in these images, reminders that grief and redemption are universal. Fringe scholars suggest that some convent chapels displayed locally discovered relics, a fragment of a saint's bone, or a drop of holy oil used to legitimize abbesses' spiritual prerogatives. Pilgrims traveled miles to venerate these relics, funneling coins into convent coffers and strengthening nuns' reputations as spiritual authorities. Historians still argue whether these relics were authentic or cleverly forged. You follow Sister Beatrice through a narrow side doorway into a small oratory lined with benches. Here she conducts a whispered ritual for a novice troubled by visions. As you step inside, the air grows cooler, scented faintly of myrrh and myrtle. The novice kneels, eyes closed, while the abbess places her hand on the girl's brow. She murmurs prayers in a soft Latin chant, infusing each syllable with warmth. You feel a tingle at the back of your skull, as though the throbbing world beyond these walls has momentarily paused. This moment underscores the convent's role as a sanctuary for spiritual distress, an early form of pastoral counseling, long before psychology existed. A hushed giggle ripples when the novice feels a tickle from an over-enthusiastic pet mouse used as a comfort companion in some convents to soothe anxious novices. You grin at the absurdity, a mouse scurrying across a prayer rug, mid-ritual, its tiny paws tapping like a miniature metronome. This quirky tidbit reminds you that spiritual authority didn't preclude moments of levity and tenderness. Historians still argue whether these pet therapies were widespread or isolated to a few nurturing abbesses. You take a seat on a stone bench in the corner, watching as Sister Beatrice gathers a group of laywomen seeking marital advice. They speak in hushed tones about disagreements with errant husbands and difficult in-laws. The abbess listens intently, then offers firm but gentle counsel. Charity begins at home, yet God does not call you to suffer cruelty in silence. Her words carry weight, echoing through generations. Convents provided women an avenue for redress outside patriarchal courts. Mainstream legal documents record multiple cases where nuns drafted marital agreements and even interceded to secure annulments under church law powers, seldom granted to secular women. Historians still argue whether these ecclesiastical interventions truly liberated women or redirected them into new forms of dependency. You drift toward a small lectern where Sister Beatrice reads aloud from a book of homilies compiled by her predecessor, The text includes sermons on forgiveness, charity, and the dignity of the individual soul, radical ideas that some theologians deemed dangerously progressive. You picture the ooze of fresh ink on the page, the faint rustle as a page turns, and the collective breath of the congregation hanging in the silent air. This sensory tableau underscores how sermons functioned as vehicles of both spiritual sustenance and subtle social critique. As the service concludes, you step back into the stone-floored cloister, the taste of incense still lingering on your tongue. You realize that spiritual authority granted convent women a voice in both sacred and secular realms, absolving sins, counseling the troubled, and shaping moral discourse in their communities. Their freedom to wield pastoral care and liturgical power resonates like distant bells across the centuries, suggesting that medieval nuns enjoyed a form of public authority rare for any women of their time. You pause beneath an archway carved with vine motifs. The once secret bell atop Sister Beatrice's crook has long since fallen silent, but its legend endures. In this world where men held most clerical offices, medieval nuns carved out spaces of spiritual leadership that challenged the Church's rigid hierarchy. Their voices, once confined to cloisters, still echo in modern conversations about women's roles in faith and society. You slip into the sunlight-flooded workshop attached to the convent's west wing, where the air hums with the rhythmic tap of stylus on parchment and the low drone of hymns drifting from the chapel. Here artistry thrives. Nuns transform blank vellum and cold stone walls into vivid testaments of faith and creativity. Mainstream chronicles affirm that by the 14th century, many convents maintained dedicated workshops for illumination painting and embroidery spaces, as vital as their infirmaries and scriptoria. Historians still argue whether convent artistic schools influenced secular guild training. A sister in a navy blue habit, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, leans over a low table strewn with pigment pots. She gently mixes powdered azurite with egg white, a technique known as tempera, to craft a brilliant ultramarine for a Virgin Mary's cloak. The pigment's powdery scent mingles with beeswax from sealed candles, creating an aroma both sweet and resinous. You trace a fingertip along a nearby brush handle, its bristles stiff with residual color, and feel the bracing grit of lapis lazuli under your nail. This tactile detail grounds you in the physicality of medieval art making long before synthetic dyes. Sister Marigold invites you to watch as she applies the first stroke to a fresco panel destined for the refectory's eastern wall. The image depicts St. Catherine in a wheel of prayer, her robes folding in lifelike drapery against a backdrop of olive trees. Beside her, quaint rabbits poke their heads from stylized flowers, a playful nod by novices to the margins of more solemn scenes. This quirky tidbit recalls the doodles you've seen in manuscripts. Even holy imagery couldn't resist a wink of humor tucked into thickets of saintly decoration. Historians still argue whether such marginalia was tolerated by abbesses or strictly forbidden. Nearby, Sister Helena meticulously threads a gold-gilded needle through a swath of crimson velvet. She's embroidering the convent's banner, a fleur-de-lis encircled by a delicate filigree of ivy leaves. The velvet's plush nap brushes against your palm when you help steady the fabric, and the gleam of dusk light on metallic thread stuns like morning dew. Historians note that convent embroidery workshops produce textiles of such quality they were commissioned by royal courts, an artisanal prestige few secular women achieved. Historians still argue whether these convent-origin textiles were labeled anonymously or carried hidden marks of their creators. You wander to a small alcove where novices learn music composition. A sister guides them through melodic notation on a slender stave, her voice lilting as she demonstrates how to place neumes above Latin verse. The soft resonance of emerging chant notes fills the corridor, each tone an echo of centuries-old tradition. Mainstream musicologists credit nun composers like Hildegard of Bingen with pioneering new melodic modes, influencing the evolution of Western chant evidence that convents were crucibles of musical innovation long before universities formalized music theory. Historians still argue whether these musical breakthroughs were directly transmitted to clerical centers. A sudden sparkle catches your eye. Sister Agnes presents you with a tiny copper engraving she's made using a burin on a soft metal plate. The print shows a stylized peacock, its tail unfurled like a fan of stars, intended for use in a devotional print sold to pilgrims. You admire the fine lines etched into metal, and imagine the sound of yeast as ink meets plate, transferring the image onto paper. This fringe craft hints at early printmaking experiments that predate Gutenberg, a bold precursor to the print revolution. Historians still argue whether convents participated in early block printing or awaited outside influence. You settle at a broad oak table where Sister Lucy is teaching novices the art of bookbinding. She slices a board of seasoned wood with a small knife to fashion thick covers, then soaks leather hides in a lime bath until supple enough to stretch across the boards. The leather's leathery aroma and the click of bone folders pressing down on edges create a sensory snapshot of manual labor imbued with reverence. You run your thumb over the freshly rounded spine of a newly bound psalter, feeling the smooth transition of leather into cover. Mainstream book historians observe that these binding techniques endured for centuries, shaping the durability of medieval codices that survive today. Historians still argue whether certain stylistic elements in bindings can be attributed to specific convent workshops. A shaft of light illuminates a glass jar filled with crushed cochineal bugs, yielding a deep crimson dye reserved for high-ranking manuscripts. Sister Marigold dips a fine brush into the ruby solution and adds whisper-thin lines to a floral border. You watch as the red pigment seeps into parchment fibers blooming like a flower at dawn. This lavish color was often reserved for sacred texts, emphasizing the convent's wealth and devotion through artistic extravagance. Yet fringe scribes whispered that some sisters pilfered scraps of indigo for secret textile dyeing projects, an artistic side hustle hidden from prying eyes. Historians still argue whether these covert endeavors were widespread or isolated. Behind you, a novice hunches over a confined space, carving a chalice design into a block of boxwood. Sister Helena explains that these wood blocks will be inked and pressed onto fabric for altar cloth patterns, a melding of woodcut and textile arts. The rasp of carving tools and the faint scent of fresh wood curls through the air like incense. This intermingling of mediums showcases how convent art workshops blurred boundaries between disciplines, nurturing multi-talented artisans rather than narrow specialists. You pause before a half-finished altarpiece, a triptych depicting the Annunciation, each panel alive with color texture and emotion. The Archangel Gabriel's wings shimmer with silver leaf. The Virgin's gaze is a study in serene resolve, and a background of crushed lapis fields evokes a celestial firmament. Mainstream art historians credit such convent-produced works with influencing late Gothic aesthetics in civic churches, demonstrating that nun artisans shaped devotional imagery far beyond cloister walls. Historians still argue whether these convent origin works were signed or kept anonymous to emphasize humility. As dusk settles, sisters gather their tools and pigments, leaving the workshop quiet, except for the soft rustle of habits and the distant toll of the evening bell. You linger by the central hearth, where a small bronze lamp casts dancing shadows on walls, still wet with fresh fresco. You breathe in the mingled scents, egg tempera beeswax crushed flowers, and realize that here, artistic expression was both a spiritual offering and a conduit for creative freedom. Medieval nuns wielded paintbrush and needle as adeptly as they wielded power over land and liturgy, carving out spaces where faith and art fused in luminous harmony. You slip into a sunlit courtroom within the bishop's palace, its vaulted ceiling echoing with hushed murmurs and the tap of wooden staffs on stone floors. You probably won't survive the drama without picturing nun versus lord as the medieval equivalent of lawyered-up siblings squabbling at Thanksgiving. Here you watch as Sister Agnes stands before a panel of ecclesiastical judges, her habit perfectly pressed, her voice precise. Mainstream canon records confirm that by the 14th century, some abbesses filed formal petitions to the papal curia to defend their convent's land rights litigations that could span decades and traverse Europe. Historians still argue whether these appeals significantly reshaped canon property law. She presents her case: a local baron claims entitlement to a strip of woodland long managed by the convent. Sister Agnes unrolls a parchment charter dated a century prior, its elegant script almost glowing in the torchlight. You sense the weight of centuries in that brittle vellum. The judge peers at the document through spectacles that look suspiciously like giant medieval googly eyes, adding a dash of unintended comedy to the solemn scene. You almost quip, "Those lenses better not magnify my wrinkles but swallow the joke." This is serious business, yet fringe accounts whisper that some sister advocates memorized entire legal codes and could recite decretals backward to throw opposing counsel off balance. Historians still argue whether such feats were legend or reality. At one side of the hall, a clerk scratches notes with a bone stylus on a wax tablet, the clack-clack echoing like a metronome counting down suspense. Sister Agnes paces, fingers interlaced behind her back, a practiced stance you'd expect from any seasoned negotiator. She cites precedents, a papal bull, granting the convent perpetual woodland rights in exchange for annual oblations, and a synodal decree affirming monastic immunity from secular taxes. Mainstream legal anthologies record these cases as foundational in defining ecclesiastical immunities. Historians still argue whether the rulings primarily served spiritual aims or reinforced church wealth. You spot the baron's representative, a burly knight with a plume-topped helmet tucked under his arm, frowning as Sister Agnes calmly dismantles his arguments. She asks him ever so politely to show any counter-charter, and when none surfaces, she leans forward and offers him a quill to sign a formal retraction. The knight's jaw drops like someone realizing their coffee order was wrong after walking out the door. A ripple of amusement passes through the gallery, but Sister Agnes remains as unflappable as a marble statue. You marvel at her poise. This is advocacy at its most sublime. Suddenly, a herald trombones an announcement the court will adjourn for mid-morning prayers. The judges file out, leaving the disputants to the silence of empty benches. Sister Agnes gathers her papers, tying them with crimson ribbon, as she hums a psalm under her breath. You catch the tune Psalm 95, the one that goes, "Oh, come, let us sing unto the Lord," possibly her personal victory anthem. This sensory moment, the ribbon's soft rustle, her soprano hum, grounds you in the human rhythms of medieval litigation. Outside the palace, you follow her along a colonnade, where water drips from carved gargoyles into a mossy trough. She explains the convent's strategy. If local courts dragged their feet, the abbess would dispatch envoys to Rome, carrying silver coins to grease the wheels of papal bureaucracy. You sniff the damp stone and temple your nostrils at the faint aroma of incense lingering from chapel prayers, a reminder that church and legal fates intertwined. Fringe law claims some convents maintained legal monks, brothers trained exclusively in canon law, who doubled as bodyguards for sister advocates on risky travels. Historians still argue whether such specialists existed or were fanciful exaggerations. A sudden bird call interrupts your thoughts. A rook swoops overhead, its caw echoing against palace walls. Sister Agnes winks conspiratorially and says, "That's our messenger. He prefers woodland disputes to pigeon post." You laugh inwardly, imagining a robed crow in tiny spectacles, filing complaints on acorn parchments. This quirky tidbit reminds you that convents blended practical seriousness with occasional whimsy, even in the solemn arena of law. You step into a sun-dappled courtyard where the convent's legal archives are stored in iron-bound chests. Sister Agnes unlocks one with a heavy key, its metal groove chafing ancient oak. Inside lie scrolls, charter copies, and pictorial maps detailing boundary stones and landmark trees. You trace your finger over a hand-painted map that shows a crooked line, the twisted elm boundary. She calls it its wavy ink line snaking through fields. The tangible texture of the parchment, rough at the edges, conveys centuries of contested claims etched into every fiber. She pulls out a curious volume bound in patched leather, a collection of precedent anecdotes, short narratives of past disputes resolved by convents. You crack it open and read an entry about an abbess who argued so persuasively that the opposing lord conceded not just land, but a flock of sheep, apparently the medieval equivalent of a settlement paid in kind. You nearly choke on your breath at the thought of sheep grazing on convent lawns as legal tribute. Mainstream historians reference similar anecdotes in pastoral letters, illustrating how convent justice sometimes yielded unexpected perks. Historians still argue whether these tales were moral exemplar or factual accounts. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you and Sister Agnes retrace your steps through the cloister, the air heavy with the scent of wet stone and spring blooms. She reflects on how legal legacies extended beyond raw power, by defending rights in court. Nuns shaped notions of property contract and justice. Their actions influenced neighboring lords to respect ecclesiastical charters and helped establish legal norms that resonate even in secular law today. You pause beneath a vine-covered arch as she tucks the precedent anecdotes back into the chest. The sun slips behind the cathedral spire, painting the courtyard in rose and amber. You realize that this legal arena, far from a dry relic, is a testament to medieval nuns' strategic savvy. They wielded canon law as deftly as any knight brandished a sword, carving out spaces of autonomy and leaving legacies of justice that still echo in modern courts. You slip through a narrow passage leading to the convent's east wing, where the walls hum with the scratch of quills and the shuffle of parchment. You probably won't survive the intrigue without picturing medieval nuns as secret networkers, on par with modern diplomats. Only their smartphones were wax tablets and messenger pigeons. As you step into a spacious parlor, the scent of sandalwood incense mingles with fresh parchment and sunlight filters through leaded glass, illuminating stacks of bound letters. Mainstream records show that by the 15th century, many convents maintained formal correspondence networks with other religious houses, royal courts, and merchant guilds, an extensive communication web as vital as any secular alliance. Historians still argue whether these networks primarily served spiritual solidarity or political maneuvering. Sister Margaret perches at a long oak table inkpot at her elbow as she reads a missive sealed with crimson wax. It bears the crest of a Cistercian abbey in Burgundy, its elegant script detailing a request for medicinal herbs and prayers for a sick abbess. You catch the faint aroma of lavender residue around the seal, an olfactory signature meant to authenticate the sender's convent. This sensory detail reminds you that letters conveyed far more than words. They carried the scent of distant cloisters, forging intangible bonds across leagues of land. Here's your quirky tidbit rumor. Whispers that some convents used coded floral symbols, like daisies for joy or nightshade for discretion, drawn in the margins to signal urgency or secrecy. A daisy doodle in the bottom corner could mean your prayers are urgent, while a hidden nightshade bloom signaled handle this with utmost confidentiality. This clandestine code turned every letter into a layered message, a medieval emoji system before emojis existed. Historians still argue whether these floral ciphers were widespread or confined to elite abbeys. You lean in as Sister Margaret breaks the wax seal with a slender knife, the soft snap echoing like a whispered confession. She unfolds the parchment carefully and smooths it flat. The letter's contents concern a joint petition to the king, urging relief from wartime levies that threaten convent estates. Mainstream chronicles note that collective appeals by multiple abbesses often carried more weight at royal courts than individual pleas, demonstrating the power of united voices. Yet some scholars debate whether these petitions truly influenced royal policy or merely served as symbolic gestures of solidarity. Historians still argue whether convent coalitions swayed medieval monarchs' fiscal decisions. Across the table, Sister Agnes dips her quill in ink and drafts a reply to a Franciscan friar seeking sponsorship for a local hospital expansion. The friar's letter praises the convent's reputation for medical care and requests a donation of cloister-grown herbs. You sense the solemn responsibility in Agnes's deliberate strokes, each word measured to balance generosity with fiscal prudence. This mainstream fact highlights how convent networks extended beyond monastic circles into burgeoning charitable institutions, early examples of cross-institution collaboration. Historians still argue whether such partnerships laid groundwork for later guild systems. You rise and wander to a corner where a wooden pigeon loft perches on a high windowsill. Dozens of white and speckled doves coo softly, their rhythmic murmurs a living echo of papal pigeons delivering critical dispatches. Each bird wears a tiny leather tag with a coded number matching dispatch logs. You trail your fingers along the rough loft door and inhale the earthy musk of feathers. This hands-on detail underscores how nuns combined natural observation with practical logistics to sustain their communication web. Your gaze shifts to a wall-mounted map, dotted with coloured pins and strings tracing routes between convents in France, Italy, and the Low Countries. Sister Helena, the convent's network coordinator, points to a red string linking to a Benedictine priory near Avignon. She explains that the priory's renowned scriptorium once gifted the convent a set of ritual chants in exchange for medical manuscripts, a knowledge barter that transcended borders. Mainstream historians credit such exchanges with fostering a pan-European intellectual community, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance's cross-cultural fertilization. Yet debates linger on whether these networks remained confined to elite houses or extended to smaller rural convents. Historians still argue whether network benefits trickled down beyond prominent monasteries. A soft tinkle interrupts your thoughts, as Sister Helena adds a fresh letter to a waiting tray bound for dispatch. She hands you the missive, a request from a Queen Dowager seeking spiritual intercession on behalf of her ailing son. The Queen's seal bears a gilded lily, and the letter's parchment is scented with rose oil, denoting royal status. You inhale the gentle perfume, your chest tightening, as you consider the stakes a convent's prayers for a royal heir, weaving spiritual influence directly into dynastic politics. You settle onto a velvet-cushioned bench and watch as novices practice calligraphy for upcoming missives. Their quills hover above parchment, dipping and lifting in rhythmic precision. Each novice must master not only Latin script, but also the art of diplomatic phrasing, striking the right tone between reverence and urgency. This training underscores how convents functioned as diplomatic academies, producing soft power experts in woven habits. Next, you join Sister Cecilia in a small antechamber lined with early printed books. She's cataloguing newly acquired incarnabular volumes produced on a Gutenberg press and marking which titles to exchange with local printers for illustrated broadsheets. The subtle scent of fresh ink and resinous polish on oak shelves envelops you. This fringe vignette hints at convents' early engagement with print culture, where women's hands shaped the spread of new technologies. Historians still argue whether convents embraced printing as readily as secular scriptoria, or remained cautious custodians of handwritten tradition. You trail after Sister Cecilia to a window overlooking the town square, where you spot a procession honoring a visiting abbess from Flanders. Her entourage includes lay sisters, choir novices, and a mounted notary carrying sealed documents. Townsfolk bow as she passes, and trumpets herald her arrival. You hear distant bells ringing in unison, a chorus of civic and ecclesiastical approval. This sensory tableau reminds you that convent networks manifested in public ceremony, blending spiritual prestige with political theatre. As dusk approaches, you gather in the great hall for the evening mail call. Letters arrive by courier pigeon and travelling merchants bearing wooden chests of documents. Sisters sort them into baskets labelled prayers, petitions and provisions. The gentle clatter of documents shifting under soft lamplight feels like the heartbeat of a living network. You help arrange sealed letters for overnight dispatch, feeling the weight of responsibility settle in your palm. You pause at the threshold of the parlour, the scent of sandalwood and aged parchment lingering in your senses. You realise that through correspondence, coded symbols and feathered messengers, medieval nuns wove a vast tapestry of influence, spiritual, political and economic stretching across kingdoms. Their networks of influence functioned as conduits of power, connecting convents to court cities and crusading fronts. In an era when women's voices were often muted, these nuns whispered across continents, and those whispers still echo in the corridors of history. You slip into a bright classroom warmed by morning sun streaming through an arched window where rows of wooden benches face a simple lectern. You probably won't survive today's lesson without picturing chalk-dusted habits and giggling novices. But here, learning is as serious as a bishop's throne. Mainstream studies confirm that by the 13th century, many convents taught not only novices, but also children from noble and common families, offering instruction in reading, writing, arithmetic, and Latin grammar, an educational model rare for girls in medieval Europe. Historians still argue whether convent schools served primarily local elites or broader communities. A sister at the front. Sister Helena taps a piece of chalk against the slate board, the soft click resonating like a whispered secret in the hush. She writes a Latin declension for Rosa, the letters curling in precise Carolingian script, Rosa, Rosae, Rosae. The chalk dust drifts to the stone floor in fine motes, each particle floating like a flake of snow in slow motion. You lean forward, inhaling the chalk's faint mineral tang, and the sweet scent of ink-stained quills resting in inkwells at every desk. Row upon row of young girls in crisp white veils copy the declension into their notebooks, quills lightly scratching parchment in unison, a rhythmic ASMR cadence that could lull a restless soul to sleep. One novice barely 10 winters old frowns as she shapes each A diphthong. Beside her, a noble child delicately traces her us endings. This sensory tableau, the rasp of quills, the soft rustle of parchment, the scraping chalk underscores how convents were among the few places where girls gained literacy skills essential for later roles as abbesses, correspondents, or teachers themselves. Here's your quirky tidbit. Rumor holds that Sister Helena once taught arithmetic by using pebbles from the cloister garden white for units, black for tens, and staged pebble races to illustrate addition and subtraction. Novices would roll stones along the bench edge cheering as their sums crossed the finish line. It's a playful precursor to modern math manipulatives, turning abstract concepts into tactile games. Historians still argue whether these pebble races were widespread or confined to a few innovative classrooms. You drift toward a corner where another sister, Sister Matilda, guides older girls through practical skills, weaving reed mats and calculating land measurements. The faint scent of wet reeds mingles with beeswax, polishing the benches, and the muted click of weaving shuttles offers a soft counterpoint to the quill chorus. She explains how to measure an acre using a rope knotted at regular intervals, a skill crucial for future estate management. Mainstream evidence indicates that convent-educated women often managed agricultural records and estate surveys, making math a tool of both scholarship and stewardship. From beneath the benches, you catch a soft giggle as a novice hides an acorn in her palm, a playful rebellion from yesterday's forest foraging lesson. Sister Matilda catches the movement and winks, reminding you that even strict instruction left room for woodland mischief. This moment of levity, tiny acorn heartbeats in hidden hands, reinforces that convent education blended discipline with delight. At the lectern, Sister Agnes raises a palm leaf manuscript to demonstrate calligraphy techniques. Her voice calm and measured recites, "In principio, creavit Deus caelum et terram," each Latin syllable unfolding like a whispered lullaby. The gentle echo of her speech in the vaulted room creates an intimate soundscape. You can almost feel the vibrations in your chest as the words resonate. This sensory detail highlights how sisters taught rhetoric and elocution, training novices in the art of persuasive speech, vital for later correspondence and leadership. You step to a side alcove where elder nuns pore over philosophical texts, Aristotle's Ethics, Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, translating passages into Old French for local vernacular workshops. The scent of leather-bound folios and the peppery bite of ink fill the air. One sister murmurs, "Virtus temperantiae est recta ratio," her finger tracing the phrase on vellum. This scholastic engagement reveals convents as centers of higher learning, where women grappled with moral philosophy centuries before universities admitted female scholars. Historians still argue whether vernacular philosophical instruction in convents influenced broader lay literacy. A soft cough interrupts your thoughts, and you turn to see a visiting scholar, a monk from the local cathedral school, peering over a nun's shoulder at her translation. He nods appreciatively, adjusting his monk's hood. He speaks quietly. "Your Latin is impeccable, sister." You smell his musty habit and the faint aroma of cedar from his pen case. This exchange underscores the intellectual respect convent scholars earned from their male counterparts, forging academic dialogues uncommon for the era. Nearby novices practice singing Gregorian chants, their voices flowing in gentle waves, Sancta Maria, Ora pro nobis. Each phrase overlaps, creating a tapestry of sound that reverberates off stone walls. The soft hum of voices like water lapping against a hull washes over you. Sister Beatrice conducts with a slender reed-marking tempo with subtle nods. Mainstream music historians credit convent choirs with preserving chant traditions during periods of liturgical reform, ensuring sacred melodies endured through tumultuous centuries. Historians still argue whether chant innovations in convents shaped later polyphonic developments. You follow Sister Beatrice to a small herb garden adjacent to the classroom, where novices learn botanical taxonomy. She plucks a sprig of rose and crushes its petals between her fingers. The scent blooms like a soft flower in your nostrils. She shows novices how to categorize herbs by medicinal properties: roses for the heart, sage for the mind, mint for the spirit. This integration of natural science into education showcases convent's holistic curricula, blending book learning with hands-on exploration. Leaning against a sun-warmed pillar, you observe a lesson in astronomy. Sister Maria points to a round astrolabe hung on the wall, its brass surface etched with zodiac signs. She turns its rotating arm to demonstrate how to calculate lunar positions for the liturgical calendar. The astrolabe's cool metal and the click of its joints convey a sensory thrill. Here sisters engaged with celestial mechanics to synchronize feasts and fasts. Mainstream astronomical treatises from the era cite convents as key centers for astrolabe workshops, linking women to the cosmos's rhythms. Historians still argue whether these astronomical pursuits extended beyond liturgical needs to early observational science. A soft breeze rustles open the classroom door, carrying the scent of baking bread from the kitchen and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. This ambient symphony, crumbs of conversation, the clank of metal, the warmth of hearth, reminds you that learning occurred within a living community. Here, education was not confined to silent reading, but woven into every aspect of convent life. As the final bell tolls, novices pack away their materials, the rustle of parchment and the click of quills subsiding. You stand at the classroom threshold, chalk dust still clinging to your cloak. You consider how convent education equipped women with literacy, numeracy, and critical thinking long before such skills became common in secular society. Their curriculum, equal parts rigor and whimsy, cultivated leaders, healers, and scholars. You step into the cloister, where the fragrance of mint and rose lingers. Birds chirp overhead, and the distant murmur of market traders drifts through the arches. You realize that medieval nuns' classrooms were crucibles of empowerment, nurturing minds as diligently as they tended gardens. In a world where female learning was scarce, convents blazed a trail of intellectual freedom that still illuminates educational debates today. You slip through the heavy oak doors of the Great Hall, where banners bearing the convent's crest hang alongside princely standards, and the air crackles with the low murmur of diplomatic exchange. You probably won't survive this without picturing nuns in habits out negotiating burly envoys. But here, spiritual garb masks formidable political savvy. The scent of polished wood mingles with beeswax, and the faint tang of spiced wine from silver flagons set upon a tapestry-draped table. Mainstream archives record that by the 15th century, some abbesses personally petitioned popes and emperors, enjoying audiences that granted them legal personhood in matters of land marriage and taxation. Historians still argue whether these audiences reflected genuine equality or were carefully staged theatrical gestures. At the center of the hall, Sister Eleanor stands beneath a painted ceiling depicting the coronation of the Virgin. Sunlight filters through tall stained glass windows, casting ruby and emerald patterns across her habit as she addresses a delegation of countesses and merchants. Her voice is calm, measured, and carries an undercurrent of steel. Your Excellencies, the convent's wool exports have sustained your markets for decades. We trust our proposed tariff adjustment will reflect this long-standing partnership. A merchant baron with a velvet cap leans forward, the soft clink of his jeweled bracelets punctuating his nod. You feel the subtle vibration underfoot as the polished stone floor registers the weight of their attention. Here's your quirky tidbit: rumor whispers that Sister Eleanor carried a carved wooden duck in her reticule, used to lighten tense negotiations by popping it out for an unexpected squeak-breaking protocol with levity. Imagine a silent chamber erupting in startled laughter when a hidden duck figurine erupts in quack, all before serious treaty clauses. This playful tactic reminds you that levity can be a potent diplomatic tool, one nuns wielded with mischievous skill. Historians still argue whether this duck-duck-quack device was a common tactic or a single legendary flourish. You lean against a gilt-edged panel and watch as Sister Eleanor unfurls a parchment treaty, its creases worn from countless readings. You catch the faint aroma of lavender sachets, pressing the treaty flat, a scent chosen to calm the nerves of even the most cantankerous noble. The inked signatures, delicate loops and flourishes gleam in lamplight, each flourish representing hours of careful negotiation. Mainstream treatises note that some convents maintained resident scribes fluent in diplomatic protocol, capable of drafting accords in Latin, French, and even Italian, ensuring their convent's voice resonated across courts. Historians still argue whether these scribes originated within convent walls or were commissioned from secular chancelleries. A hush falls as a papal nuncio steps forward, his crimson robes brushing the marble floor. He offers a ceremonial kiss to the convent's crozier, then addresses the assembly in Latin. You catch the soft rustle of silken sleeves and the gentle click of his rosary beads as he speaks. The Holy See acknowledges the convent's impartial mediation in regional disputes, and we hereby grant renewed privileges for pilgrim hospitality. His proclamation echoes against frescoed walls like a distant chime, sending a palpable wave of relief through the gathered nobles. This mainstream fact underscores that convents often served as neutral ground for treaty negotiations, their sacred status lending moral weight to political settlements. You stroll toward a side alcove where Sister Agnes pours spiced wine into delicate ceramic cups for visiting rulers. The wine's cinnamon-spiked aroma swirls with the scent of rose-petaled confetti strewn across the stone floor, a ceremonial gesture of welcome. You sip the warm blend, tasting a hint of clove and orange peel that stirs memories of distant orchards. This sensory moment reminds you that hospitality was itself diplomatic currency. A well-chosen cup of wassail could smooth ruffled tempers more effectively than any parchment clause. Nearby novice scribes in linen habits record the proceedings on wax-lined tablets, their styluses tapping in synchronized rhythm. You notice one shy novice tracing the nuncio's seal, her brow furrowed in concentration. Sister Margaret whispers to you that novices underwent rigorous training in chancery etiquette. They learned to identify subtle variations in seals, inks, and parchment quality, a forensic skill that safeguarded their convent's interests. Historians still argue whether novice-trained scribes ever uncovered forged charters or simply followed written protocols. At the high table, Sister Eleanor and a regional prince exchange gifts. She presents carved ivory combs inlaid with mother-of-pearl, while he offers a finely wrought iron pectoral cross bearing his family crest. The cross's weight presses gently in her palm, its cool metal contrasting with the warmth of her leather-lined gloves. You watch as she inclines her head in sincere gratitude. This ceremonial exchange embodies mutual respect, blending spiritual symbolism with political alliance. Suddenly, the hall's great doors swing open, and a delegation of merchant guildmasters files in their tunics, trimmed with ermine and gold. One steps forward, unfurling a roll of cloth samples dyed in deep indigo and rich crimson. He petitions for convent support in establishing a new trading post along the Rhine. Sister Eleanor examines each swatch, her fingers brushing the wool's weave, feeling its weight and texture an expert's touch. She raises an eyebrow and counters. "We will grant your request on condition that a portion of net profits fund our hospital's expansion." The guildmasters exchange glances. This quid pro quo echoes through the hall like a well-struck bell. Mainstream economic records confirm that convent merchant alliances often included charitable stipulations turning profit into social good, a practice that foreshadowed modern corporate philanthropy. Historians still argue whether such pacts prioritized spiritual aims or economic expediency. You wander to a side table where charred remains of incense lie in a silver censer. The smoke curls upward in lazy spirals, carrying cedar and frankincense notes. Sister Margaret explains that diplomatic gatherings always began with incense to purify the air and symbolize divine oversight, setting a tone of sanctity for secular negotiations. This multi-sensory detail grounds you in the ritual choreography underpinning every word spoken in this hall. A soft murmur rises as Sister Eleanor steps to a carved marble dais, to deliver a closing address. Her voice gentle, yet unwavering, thanks all participants and invokes a blessing. May this accord bring peace to our lands and mercy to the suffering. You sense the collective exhale of relief, like the release of tension after a deep meditation. The glow of torches flickers across noble faces, revealing smiles of cautious optimism. As you leave the great hall, the lingering scent of wine and incense trails behind you like a veil. You realize that convent diplomacy blended ceremony scholarship and shrewd negotiation into a seamless art form. Medieval nuns wielded spiritual authority and social acumen in tandem, forging alliances that shaped borders, economies, and alliances across Europe. Their freedom to engage in diplomatic dialogues carved pathways of influence that resonate in today's interfaith and international peacemaking efforts. You slip through the great iron gates of the convent precinct into a world aflame where the acrid stench of smoke mingles with the chilling cry of displaced peasants. You probably won't survive this without picturing nuns in habits donning soot-darkened veils. But here, spiritual women become crisis commanders on the medieval battlefield of famine, plague, and rebellion. The sun glares off charred timbers and overturned carts, and every breath tastes of ash and desperation. Mainstream chronicles confirm that during the mid-14th century Great Famine and subsequent Black Death, many convents organized large-scale relief operations, distributing grain, nursing the sick, and sheltering refugees. Historians still argue whether these convent efforts significantly reduced mortality or merely mitigated local suffering. Sister Eleanor, no stranger to diplomatic parley, now dons a stained wool cloak over her habit and strides toward a column of famine-stricken villagers. Their gaunt faces and hollow eyes flicker with wary hope as she lifts a wooden scoop ladling thick barley gruel into cracked bowls. The gruel's steamy aroma of boiled grain and salt cuts through the stale air like a promise of warmth. You step forward beside her, heart pounding, feeling the sting of that first spoonful, a gritty reminder that sustenance in crisis is both nourishment and ritual. This sensory detail underscores how convent kitchens became emergency soup kitchens, feeding hundreds daily. Here's your quirky tidbit: rumor holds that some nuns disguised extra barley in enchanted-looking grudge loaves, baked with playful runes to encourage overeating by skeptical survivors. Novices inscribed little flower symbols, stars for hope, crosses for faith, before baking, blending charity with covert cheer. Fringe accounts debate whether these rune breads truly coax children to finish their helping, or simply amused staff in grim times. Historians still argue whether grudge loaves were commonplace or isolated acts of convent whimsy. Beyond the makeshift bakery, you follow Sister Agnes into a squalid tent, where plague victims lie on straw pallets, cheeks mottled with fever. She dips a linen rag into a bucket of vinegar and water, wringing it until droplets like tears fall onto the patient's brow. The sharp tang of vinegar mingles with the sour reek of sweat and sickness. Each dab is both antiseptic ritual and act of mercy, a fragile boundary between life and oblivion. Mainstream medical treatises record that nuns' vinegar compresses combined with prayers offered symptomatic relief, even without understanding microbial causes. Historians still argue whether these treatments offered genuine clinical benefit or psychological comfort. You trail her to a clearing where a hastily erected wooden cross marks the center of a makeshift cemetery. Nearby, novices dig shallow graves with worn spades, their rhythmic thud echoing like sobbing drums. Sister Margaret stands overseeing the work, her normally gentle voice transformed into a firm call for order. Line the graves due east in God's light. Wrap each body in winding sheets of linen. The linen's scratchy texture grazes your fingertips as you help fold a corpse with trembling reverence. This mortal choreography, burying hundreds daily, reveals how convents shouldered the emotional toll of mass mortality. Outside the cemetery fence, you encounter displaced families huddled around a single fire, roasting meager turnips and roots. Sister Beatrice moves among them, distributing small pouches of herbs gathered from the convent garden yarrow, for fevers, plantain for wounds, and lavender for comfort. The herbs' mingled fragrances, earthy, floral, and minty, create an olfactory blanket against the stench of decay. Mainstream agrarian records note that convent cultivated herb gardens, supplied emergency stores during crop failures, showcasing the foresight of monastic horticulture. Historians still argue whether these botanical reserves were stockpiled intentionally or improvised ad hoc. A sudden distant clang signals approaching unrest, a band of armed peasants starving, and desperate marches toward the convent gate, torches ablaze. You grip the rough iron bars alongside Sister Agnes as she meets their leader, a gaunt man with blazing eyes and a broken scythe. His voice trembles. "Feed my people, or I take what you store." Sister Agnes, undeterred, lifts her chin and offers him a single loaf sliced in two. The loaf's crust cracks under his teeth, revealing warm crumb inside. He takes a bite, eyes softening. You taste the loaf's smoky warmth, a fleeting peace brokered by bread. Fringe tales suggest abbacies once parleyed with revolting serfs by offering them sewing work and chapel sanctuary, in exchange for non-violence, a radical blend of charity and pragmatic diplomacy. Historians still argue whether convent-mediated truces ended local uprisings or merely delayed them. As dusk falls and the sky bruises purple, you join a column of nuns carrying lanterns through torched villages. The lanterns' flickering light casts dancing shadows on blackened walls, their smoky scent woven with beeswax. Sister Eleanor leads you to a ruined chapel where survivors huddle, eyes hollow. She kneels in the rubble, raising her voice in broken Latin chant. The chant's low vibration resonates in the charred beams, a sonic balm that blankets trauma in sacred sound. Mainstream anthropological studies suggest communal prayer in crisis fostered social cohesion and psychological resilience, even when food and medicine ran low. Historians still argue whether convents leveraged spiritual authority to maintain social order or simply offered genuine solace. You step back into the convent's main hall walls, scarred by the conflict's echo. Here, Sister Margaret has organized a triage station. Tables groan under baskets of quilts, bowls of porridge, and jars of healing salves. Novices sought supplies, their whispered Latin prayers rising and falling like the sigh of a hearth. You lean on a table, feeling the heat of near-empty bowls, the weight of responsibility in every rattle of wooden spoons against clay dishes. Following a long night, you emerge at dawn to find the convent grounds transformed into a sprawling refugee camp. Straw huts sprout beneath yews, and children in ragged clothes chase geese around stone columns. Sister Beatrice instructs novices to teach reading and sewing to orphans, offering a semblance of routine amid chaos. You smell fresh straw, the crisp morning air, and the faint tang of new ink on copied primers. This sensory tableau underscores how convents shifted from crisis response to community rebuilding, providing education, shelter, and hope amid ruins. As the sun climbs, Sister Agnes convenes a council of lay stewards, military envoys, and local elders. They stand in a circle beneath the chapter house's vaulted ceiling, negotiating the return of farmland reconstruction plans and distribution of tithe relief. You sense the room's tension give way to structured agreements, quills, scratching parchment, peace accords, lords pledging grain repayment, and stewards promising fair labor quotas. Mainstream legal histories cite convents' post-crisis councils as foundational to later municipal charters, embedding women's leadership in civic governance. Historians still argue whether these councils set genuine precedents or were exceptional responses to extraordinary disasters. You pause at the convent's herb garden, now repurposed to cultivate fast-growing crops, lettuce, radishes, and spinach to feed refugees quickly. The damp soil's scent mingles with tender greens, an olfactory promise of renewal. You kneel beside a row of spinach leaves glistening with dew-tasting hope in their crisp texture. In this space of healing and rebuilding, medieval nuns wielded freedom not just in prayer or parchment, but in crisis leadership, organizing relief, negotiating peace, and planting seeds of recovery. As evening bells peal across the grounds, you tread the cloister's stone pathway, the memory of fire and famine giving way to flickering lamplight and chorus hymns. You realize that in crisis, these medieval nuns transcended convent walls, becoming architects of survival and stewards of resilience. Their command of compassion and logistics resonates like distant bells, reminding us that freedom flourishes when service lights the darkest hours. You slip into the candlelit oratory, where incense smoke coils in lazy spirals around painted icons, and the hush is pregnant with expectancy. You probably won't survive this without picturing nuns scribbling revelations by flickering flame. But here, mystical movements bloom like midnight flowers in the convent's hidden chambers. The scent of burning myrrh and crushed rose petals hangs heavy, and each inhalation feels like a benediction. Mainstream scholars note that by the 14th century, many convents produced visionary writings, mystical treatises, and revelatory letters that circulated among elite clerics and even reached papal eyes. Historians still argue whether these women's visions shaped official doctrine or remained marginal curiosities. You settle on a cushioned stool beside Sister Hildegard, not the famed abbess, but a namesake novice with fiery eyes, who holds a wax tablet inscribed with her latest nocturnal revelation. She reads in a soft, breathless voice. "Last night, I beheld the soul's ascent on wings of light carried by seraphic choirs through Chalcedony skies." Her voice trails off as the candle guttering on the lectern casts trembling shadows on her pale face. This sensory detail, the wax's faint honey scent, the tremor of oil flame roots you in the intimate space between vision and recording. Here's your quirky tidbit. Rumor has it that some sisters use small vials of consecrated water mixed with ground pearl to enhance their visionary trances, drinking the mixture before prayer to sharpen spiritual senses. Novices referred to it as pearl tea, a shimmering brew likened to morning dew on saintly petals. Fringe manuscripts debate whether pearl tea truly induced mystical states or simply caused mild nausea, but the ritual's theatrical flair is undeniable. Historians still argue whether these alchemical aids shaped genuine mystical experiences or were convent stagecraft. As you lean in, Sister Hildegard dips her stylus into an ink pot scented with lavender and notes each phrase with meditative care. The tactile scraping of quill on parchment forms a soft ASMR echo, a whispering lullaby of devotion. You feel the parchment's slight tooth under your fingertips when she offers you a blank sheet to try your own imitation vision. You hesitate, then sketch a tiny flame engulfed in spiraling vines, your first venture into mystical marginalia. Beyond the oratory's curtain, you cross into a covert alcove where an informal circle of sisters gathers. Soft lantern light reveals a semicircle of velvet cushions, and the air vibrates with hushed anticipation. Sister Agnes presides, her habitual leadership now applied to spiritual exploration. She invites one nun at a time to share dreams from the previous night, then interprets them through scriptural lenses. This communal dreamwork mirrors practices described in medieval mystical guides, underscoring convents as centers for collective spiritual introspection. Historians still argue whether such dream circles adhered to orthodox theology or flirted with heterodox mysticism. You watch Sister Margaret rise to speak. She describes a dream of walking through a forest where trees whispered psalms and deer bowed in reverence. The sisters lean forward, eyes shining, as Agnes correlates forest symbolism with the soul's journey, citing the Song of Solomon. A hush falls, broken only by the scent of jasmine oil, burning in a brass burner, its sweet perfume thick as velvet. This sensory tapestry, soft voices, perfumed air, intimate shadows, immerses you in the convent's mystical laboratory. Suddenly, laughter ripples through the circle when a novice recounts accidentally toppling a lantern during a trance, setting a prayer mat aflame. They all choke on giggles as Agnes waves a hand to calm the flames and delivers a playful admonition: "Let your spirit burn, but spare the mats." This quirky anecdote reminds you that mystical fervor coexisted with very human slip-ups, and that humor softened the intensity of visionary practice. After the dream circle, you follow a candlelit corridor lined with carved wooden panels depicting saintly visions. Each relief shows figures bathed in radiant halos or enveloped in swirling clouds, visual sermons carved by convent artisans. You stop before a panel of St. Mechtild, receiving streams of light from Christ's wounded heart. The panel's polished wood gleams under torchlight, its fragrance of pine and varnish blending with the oratory's incense. Mainstream art historians link such imagery to devotional manuals used in nunneries, reflecting a symbiosis of visionary writing and visual theology. Historians still argue whether these panels served didactic purposes or merely commemorated abbey legends. You slip into a small lecture chamber where Sister Cecilia reads excerpts from a recently discovered mystical text by a celebrated abbess. The folio's vellum crackles softly as she turns the page. You catch the tang of old ink mixed with smoky resin. The text describes an inner furnace where divine love forges the soul's steel, a metaphor so vivid you can almost taste molten metal on your tongue. This mainstream fact highlights the depth and poetic power of nun-authored spirituality, a tradition sometimes overshadowed by male mystics in popular memory. Historians still argue whether women's mystical contributions were systematically marginalized in ecclesiastical histories. You rise to join novices practicing scriptural illumination. Each holds a chalice-shaped cameo and paints miniature flames licking around Latin verses with cinnabar and gold dust. The burnished red pigment sparkles like embers, and you feel its warmth when the light catches it just right. This tactile artistry underscores how mystical texts weren't just read, they were crafted as sensory experiences, melding word color and gilded illumination into unified expressions of devotion. Finally, you enter the cloister garden under a silver moon. Lanterns hang from trellised vines casting pools of light on rose bushes and medicinal herbs. Sister Beatrice stands at a marble fountain reciting lines from a feminine mystic, "O night, my comfort, bear me into hidden realms." The fountain's trickle underscores her chant, a watery counterpoint to her lilting voice. You close your eyes and feel cool mist on your cheeks, the night's fragrance of damp earth and blossoming jasmine enveloping you. You slip into the convent's austere chapter house, its stone benches worn smooth by centuries of deliberation and discipline. You probably won't survive this without picturing the hushed tension of whispered accusations. But here, scandal and sanction unfolded, like morality plays in the very heart of holy order. The scent of incense has given way to cold stone and dust, the only sound the muted scrape of habited feet. Mainstream monastic records show that by the 15th century, convents maintained internal tribunals to investigate everything from minor breaches of enclosure to serious charges of heresy or illicit correspondence processes that could lead to penance removal or even papal intervention. Historians still argue whether these tribunals upheld genuine justice or reinforced hierarchical control. You take a seat among the sisters, the echo of your cloak soft against flagstone. At the head of the room, the prioress, her face stern in the flickering lamplight, reads aloud a list of charges against Sister Agnes, allegations of smuggling secular letters, consorting with a troubadour, and hosting clandestine meetings in the herb garden at midnight. You feel the weight of each word, as if the very air thickens with the gravity of potential ruin. This official proceeding reveals that convent freedom had boundaries, and stepping beyond them risked both reputation and vows. Here's your quirky tidbit: rumor whispers that during one notorious trial, a novice was accused of sneaking lamb's wool into her habit to sleep more comfortably, considered a form of secret luxury. To the abbey's shock, the wool was discovered only when the novice sneezed mid-prayer, sending a puff of fleece drifting into the candle flame. Fringe anecdotes claim the prioress responded by staging a clandestine pillow fight in the infirmary as penance for the young sister's fleece faux pas, a levity that shocked traditionalists. Historians still argue whether this whimsical penance actually occurred or was fabrication by amused novices. The prioress's voice rises. Does the accused plead Sister Agnes? Stands the dull gleam of her rosary beads clutched in one hand. Her eyes meet the prioress's, and for a moment, the chapter house seems to hold its breath. She bows her head and replies, "I plead not guilty to intentions unworthy of my vows." The formal exchange underscores how even powerful abbesses submitted to the convent's rule, highlighting that freedom resided within, not above, communal discipline. Outside the inner door, you spot two lay sisters standing guard, their candle flames jittering like nervous thoughts. One holds a parchment scroll, the official summons from the diocesan bishop, indicating that the matter may escalate beyond the convent walls. This mainstream fact illustrates that serious sanctions could involve external authorities offering recourse, but also exposing nuns to ecclesiastical power structures that sometimes clashed with convent autonomy. Historians still argue whether bishops abused such authority or respected convent self-governance. You lean forward as the prioress appoints 4 sisters to form the investigatory panel. Each takes a seat on the dais, one an expert in liturgical rule, another in canon law, and 2 known for their unwavering moral rigor. Their faces, half shadowed by wimples and hoods, reflect solemn responsibility. You sense the gravity. This is not a perfunctory ritual, but a genuine inquiry into one sister's conduct, with possible exile or lifelong penance at stake. A scribe in a side alcove dips his quill, the soft scratch of ink on parchment filling the hush like a drawn breath. He records evidence letters in a companion's handwriting, torn fragments of troubadour verse, eyewitness testimony from another novice, and even a piece of lute string found in Sister Agnes's cell. Each exhibit carries its own story of desire, artistic longing, or simple curiosity. Yet here, they become indictments in a sacred court. When testimony begins, you hear Sister Beatrice speak first. Her voice trembles, not from malice, but from sorrow. I saw Agnes under the moon's glow, laughter in her eyes, as she received a letter bound with a rose ribbon. The memory's scent of rose petals seems to linger in the chapter house's stale air, reminding you how sensory details could seal reputations. Mainstream convent statutes forbade private correspondence without permission measures intended to preserve enclosure, but sometimes wielded to stifle intellectual exchange. Historians still argue whether these rules protected spiritual focus or suppressed creative freedom. Next, Sister Cecilia offers a defense. That meeting was no secret tryst, but a gathering to discuss herbal remedies for the infirmary. She presents a small bundle of sage leaves stamped with the infirmary's seal and invites the panel to sniff its calming aroma. You inhale the herb's earthy warmth and almost believe her. This clever defense blends scholarship with sensory persuasion, turning a disciplinary hearing into a debate over context and intent. A ripple passes through the courtroom when the prioress produces a letter from the bishop, urging discretion, yet demanding accountability. The bishop's seal, a stylized fish surrounded by waves, conveys both pastoral care and hierarchical reach. You feel the tension between convent freedom and external oversight, between the sisters' desire for self-rule and the broader church's interest in doctrinal conformity. As the panel withdraws to deliberate, you wander to a window overlooking the cloister garden. Moonlight glints on dew-laden lavender, its fragrance drifting up as if in solidarity. You brush past a row of rose bushes, their petals soft under your fingertips, and wonder whether Sister Agnes's critics recognized that love for poetry and petals often went hand in hand with devotion. After an anxious wait, the panel returns. The prioress rises and pronounces judgment. Sister Agnes is acquitted of ill intent, but found to have breached enclosure. Her penance, 1 month's seclusion in the hermitage hut, daily recitation of the penitential psalms, and surrender of all private correspondence. The verdict balances mercy with discipline, upholding community order, while sparing the accused from harsher sanctions. Mainstream disciplinary records show that convent tribunals often tempered justice with compassion, reflecting the dual aims of correction and restoration. Historians still argue whether such outcomes favored leniency or reinforced strict hierarchies. You exhale as the chapter rises, the final echo of benches scraping against stone. Sister Agnes bows to the assembly, her dignity intact, though her freedom momentarily curtailed. You see the relief in her eyes mingled with resolve. She knows that sanction need not extinguish autonomy, but can refine it through contrition. As you leave the chapter house, the scent of lavender trails your steps, and the distant toll of the abbey bell marks the hour. You reflect on how scandal and sanction functioned as both constraints and recalibrations institutions that policed convent boundaries, yet allowed room for mercy debate and personal growth. In this delicate dance, medieval nuns navigated powerful freedoms and communal responsibilities, reaffirming that true autonomy often emerges not in the absence of rule, but within its careful application. You step into the twilight of the convent's grand hall, now silent except for the soft rustle of habits and the distant toll of vesper bells. You probably won't survive this final reflection without picturing yourself cloaked in centuries of tradition. But here, the legacy of liberation unfurls like a tapestry stitched by countless sisters. The scent of aged stone mingles with crushed lavender from the herb rack, and a single candle flickers on a marble pedestal, casting long shadows across banners embroidered with laurel wreaths and doves. Mainstream historians note that by the early modern period, the network schools and charitable institutions founded by medieval nuns had evolved into enduring orders that shaped social welfare education and women's spiritual leadership across Europe. Historians still argue whether these legacies were consciously preserved or naturally emerged from institutional momentum. You move toward a massive oak chest carved with triumphal arches, its lid bearing an iron lock intricately forged by the convent's master smith centuries ago. Inside lie relics of renewal charter scrolls, affirming convent rights, illuminated manuscripts chronicling every abbess's tenure, and the original precedent anecdotes volume you glimpsed in Section 8. You trace the faded ink of a particular charter, its script stipulating the convent's right to educate noble daughters, and feel the weight of your own inheritance. This sensory connection, the papery rustle, the scent of aged parchment, the cool metal of the lock anchors you in a continuum of empowerment that stretches from cloistered cells to modern boardrooms. Here's your quirky tidbit: rumor holds that one abbess seeking to commemorate her convent's 50th anniversary commissioned a freedom bell cast from melted confiscated fetters chains once worn by serfs freed through convent petition. The bell's deep toll still rings on festival days, its sound said to carry the resonance of every woman's emancipatory prayer. Fringe scholars debate whether the fetter metal truly came from freed serfs or simply symbolized liberation, but the legend endures much like the convent's spirit of autonomy. Historians still argue whether the freedom bell was a literal artifact or a poetic emblem. You pause by a painted mural depicting 3 nuns handing scrolls to a group of townsfolk, representing the first public reading of the town charter, drafted under abbess leadership. The mural's colors, deep russet muted gold and verdant green, have faded, but still exude quiet dignity. You feel the plaster's rough texture beneath your fingertips and the cool brushstrokes of pigment under your palm. This tactile moment underscores how medieval women's written contributions, legal, educational, and spiritual, were literally etched into communal memory. Across the hall, you see a line of young novices studying illuminated maps of former convent estates, now transformed into universities, hospitals, and charitable foundations bearing their names. A gentle breeze drifts in through the arched doorway, carrying the distant hum of modern life. Children's laughter from the school founded on convent grounds, the rhythmic clink of surgical instruments in the hospital chapel, and the soft murmur of scholars debating in a lecture hall. This multisensory convergence, echoes of past and present, reveals how medieval convent freedoms seeded future institutions that continue to shape society. You step to the high altar, where a silver chalice once used by a daring abbess to host clandestine Eucharists for persecuted Protestants gleams in the candlelight. You lift the chalice, its cold metal resonating with history's weight, and can almost hear whispered prayers of solidarity that transcended doctrinal strife. Mainstream ecclesiastical records acknowledge these moments of sacramental courage, though they often appear as footnotes in broader church histories. Historians still argue whether such acts constituted heresy or prophetic witness. A novice offers you a sprig of sage from the adjacent herb stand, its scent crisp and grounding. You inhale deeply, feeling the herb's ancient promise of wisdom flow through you. This gift echoes the convent's tradition of nurturing both body and mind, an integrated freedom to heal, teach, and counsel that defied narrow gender roles. This sensory offering, earthy, aromatic, immediate, links you to every sister who walked these cloisters seeking knowledge and service. As you make your way to the chapter house threshold, you pass banners celebrating key convent milestones: the founding abbess's arrival by pilgrimage, the establishment of the first girls' school, the opening of the infirmary door to the poor. Each banner's fabric is brittle, its threads unspooling, yet their imagery remains vivid. Sisters guiding sheep to pastures, novices clutching books, daughters of noble and common birth, exchanging laughter beneath cloister arches. These visual stories remind you that medieval nuns crafted spaces of shared learning and care that transcended class and convention. You settle on the stone steps leading to the cloister garden, where twilight weaves golden threads through vine-laced trellises. Cricket song rises like a lullaby, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine drapes you in calm. You close your eyes and recall the covenant of freedom. You've witnessed a covenant forged by vows of poverty that birthed economic stewardship, vows of obedience that fueled intellectual rigor, and vows of chastity that paradoxically liberated spiritual authority. This reflection coalesces into a final realization. Medieval convent freedoms were not anomalies, but blueprints for collective autonomy, demonstrating that constraint can catalyze innovation, and that service can be the surest path to empowerment. Now, as the candle's flame softens and shadows lengthen across these hallowed halls, allow your breath to slow to the rhythm of ancient prayers. You sit beneath a bower of climbing roses, each petal whispering stories of courage, scholarship, and compassion. Think of every sister who tended these gardens, their hands turned the earth, and their hearts rooted in possibility. Let the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant drone of evening prayers wrap around you like a warm shawl. Feel the cool stone beneath your fingertips, carved by countless hands, seeking solace and wisdom. Sense the lingering fragrance of lavender and sage relics of the convent's botanical sanctuary, soothing your mind and spirit. Recall the soft murmur of quills on parchment, the echo of chants in vaulted chapels, and the laughter that once trickled through sunlit workshops and cloistered classrooms. Each memory is a thread in a tapestry of service and study that stretches beyond these walls. Rest easy, knowing that these medieval nuns, through vows both humble and daring, forged paths of liberation that still guide us today. Their legacy lives on in schools that teach girls to read, hospitals that heal the vulnerable, and courts that honor equality under law. So let your eyelids grow heavy with gratitude for pioneers of freedom who sang, wrote, and prayed their way into history's heart. Tonight, as crickets sing and stars wink through the twilight canopy, carry this peace with you into sleep. Dream of stone cloisters bathed in moonlight, of hands ink-stained with possibility, and of voices that rose in harmony to reshape a world bound by rigid norms. Rest now cradled by the echoes of their courage and the hush of sacred spaces made for growth, and know that freedom blooms most beautifully where dedication and compassion entwine.